Viewer discretion is advised, and I'm not the owner of these videos. The links to the channels and videos will be in the description down below. Let's get right into this sad video.
Countless times today we have seen friends and family, even strangers, come together to share hugs and tears as Western New York and the city of good neighbors starts the grieving process. This as we continue to learn more about the 10 innocent victims that died here just yesterday. Roberta Drury was only 32 years old. She was born near Syracuse and moved to Buffalo in 2010 after her brother had a bone marrow transplant to treat leukemia. Friends say she was a regular at this Tops location and always willing to help and share a laugh. 86-year-old Ruth Whitfield was the mother of retired Buffalo Police Chief Garnell Whitfield. She stopped at the grocery store yesterday to pick up some food after visiting her husband in a nearby nursing home. Aaron Salter was a retired police officer working the weekend security shift at Tops and is being hailed as a hero tonight. Officials say he fired multiple times at the attacker, but the bullet did not go through his armor-plated vest, and Salter was shot and killed. ABC News spoke with a Buffalo police officer and a friend of Salter's tonight.
By chance, there was someone just giving an interview, and someone said, well, who was working today in terms of security? Because the gentleman talked about the security officer, responding, and he said Aaron, and I immediately knew who he was talking about, and it was like a shock. It was like almost like your chest start like that.
Officer Roscoe Henderson calls Aaron Salter, quote, a good brother. The family of Deacon Hayward Patterson telling us he was shot while sitting in his truck. They described him as a loving person. He leaves behind a daughter and a wife. We spoke to one of his relatives about the loss his family is dealing with and feeling.
Honorable man, a family man, a working man, a community man, an honest man that was at a grocery store in a parking lot.
Hayward Patterson described as a loved one who loved his family and this community. Marcus Morris of Buffalo was just 52 years old. He leaves behind several children. Pearl Young was a teacher in the Buffalo Public School District. She was born in Alabama but lived in Buffalo for decades. Young had 2 sons and a daughter. Her family describes her as a, quote, beautiful, sweet woman. We've also learned the names of the other 4 victims. They are 53-year-old Andre McNeil, 62-year-old Geraldine Talley, 65-year-old Celestine Cheney, and 72-year-old Catherine Massey. May they all be remembered.
This morning, we're continuing to follow a deadly mass shooting out of New York. Police say 10 people are dead after a teenager opened fire in a Buffalo supermarket. Michael Wooten has the latest for us this morning.
Around 2:30 in the afternoon,
possible active shooter at the top. There are still shots being fired.
At a place where we feel safe.
Put as many cars as you possibly can.
The deadliest mass shooting in Buffalo history.
This was pure evil.
Inspired by white supremacy, authorities say the shooter drove here from his home 3.5 hours away in Broome County.
This tragic incident by someone who is not a part of our community, does not live here.
Police say he drove up to the Tops Market on Jefferson Avenue armed with a semi-automatic rifle and wearing body armor.
He exited.
Hitting the road, not all 5G networks are created equal. T-Mobile covers more highway miles.
Exited his vehicle. He was very heavily armed. He had tactical gear. He had a tactical helmet on. He had a camera that he was live streaming what he was doing.
After shooting 4 in the parking lot, killing 3, police say he entered the supermarket.
Beloved security guard who was a retired Buffalo police officer, a hero in our eyes, engaged the suspect, fired multiple shots, struck the suspect, but because he had heavily armored plating on, that bullet had no round.
The police commissioner says the suspect then shot and killed that retired officer, identified as Aaron Salter, allowing the rampage to continue. In all, 9 were shot inside, the total death toll rising to 10 before patrol officers arrived on scene and convinced the suspect to put down his gun and surrender. While motives are often elusive this early in an investigation, the Erie County Sheriff said that is not the case here.
It was straight up racially motivated hate crime from somebody outside of our community, outside of the city of Good Neighbors, coming into our community and trying to inflict that evil upon us.
Investigators are reviewing the live stream of the attack and a racist manifesto published online. Sources say he etched the N-word into one of his weapons.
We are investigating this incident as both a hate crime and a case of racially motivated violent extremism.
That falls within the FBI's counterterrorism division, the feds assisting local police.
Whatever we need, we will not stop until justice is brought to this community, those families, and the victims of this horrific crime.
The U.S. Attorney asked for peace amid the horror, a plea echoed by Buffalo's council president during a post-news conference prayer.
Pray for peace. Pray for unity. But most of all, God, we pray that justice be done.
As so many now say a prayer for this city in mourning. In Buffalo, I'm Michael Wooten reporting.
Begin with the latest on a...
At the Texas rampage comes just 10 days after another shooting massacre at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, left 10 people dead. Gabe Gutierrez joins us. Gabe, this Texas tragedy comes as we're seeing a rise in mass shootings in this country.
Yeah, that's right, Lester. This is the deadliest school shooting in the U.S. since the Parkland rampage in February of 2018. As has become common now, there are already growing calls to stop gun violence, which has been especially brutal this year. Another crime scene, another earth-shattering act of violence, another mass shooting in America. This one at an elementary school full of 2nd through 4th graders.
What are we doing? What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year.
Senator Chris Murphy represents Newtown, Connecticut, the somber site of its own elementary school massacre a decade ago. Fred Gutenberg's daughter was one of 17 students and staff killed in 2018 at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida.
Are we going to watch more kids die, or are we going to do something?
Already this year, there have been more than 200 mass shootings, according to data from the Gun Violence Archive. And a new FBI report shows the number of active shooter incidents in the U.S. last year jumped more than 50% compared to the year before. The shooters increasingly choosing soft targets. Just days ago, 10 people were killed at a supermarket in Buffalo. Their funeral is still underway. In California, a gunman targeted a church. In the last 3 years, gunmen have opened fire at a kosher market in New Jersey, a Walmart in El Paso, and a supermarket in Boulder, Colorado. The statistics are clear, but what to do about them is not.
We are seeing way too many of these horrific mass murders, and we need to devote far more law enforcement resources to stopping violent criminals and preventing these kind of absolute acts of evil.
And Gabe, we spent part of the day together covering this, watching it unfold. We've both been to more of these scenes that we care to think about. What went through your mind as you watched those pictures today?
Yeah, Lester, we were on the air, as you said, when the governor revealed that death toll. And it was just a gut punch. How many of these shootings have we reported on together over the past decade or so? You know, I think back to Columbine. I was just a teenager then, but it all felt so unbelievable. How tragic is it that this now feels so common?
And some of the conversations that we had after Buffalo, after many of these others we're having again or are being had
Yeah, that's exactly right. And certainly a lot of questions in the coming days about what to do, if anything can be done about this. It's always so hard to find out the motive.
Yeah. All right, Gabe, thank you. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News.
The decision to have officers wait for backup and a SWAT team as gunshots echoed inside Robb Elementary in Uvalde Tuesday was the wrong decision and possibly a dead one. Hello.
Began with the latest on a mass shooting at a supermarket in New York, which investigators now believe was a hate crime. The mass shooting began outside the store, and then the shooter entered and killed at least 10 people, according to investigators. Michael George has the latest from New York.
Buffalo police say the gunman wore body armor and military-style clothing as he opened fire and live-streamed the deadly rampage at the Tops Friendly Market.
We have suffered a mass shooting with multiple casualties and several people injured. This is the worst nightmare that any community can face, and we are hurting and we are seething right now as a community.
Authorities say the 18-year-old suspect was quickly taken into custody after carrying out the nation's latest mass shooting.
And so I saw him doing this, and I'm like, I don't got a phone on me, so I'm like, I'm screaming, somebody called the police.
The FBI questioned Peyton Gendron late Saturday, and he was later arraigned and charged with first-degree murder.
The shooter traveled hours from outside this community to perpetrate this crime on the people of Buffalo.
Police say the suspected shooter drove many miles across the state before the attack in a predominantly black neighborhood. A law enforcement source tells CBS News he was yelling racial slurs during the shooting spree.
This was pure evil. It was straight up racially motivated hate crime.
The FBI is involved in the investigation, and Governor Kathy Hochul says New York's Hate Crimes Task Force is also taking part. Michael George, CBS News, New York.
Well, a court hearing is scheduled for next week. The Buffalo shooting happened just over a year after an attack that killed 10 people at a grocery store in Colorado.
The decision to have officers wait for backup and a SWAT team as gunshots echoed inside Robb Elementary in Uvalde Tuesday was the wrong decision and possibly a dead one. Hello, I'm Steve Eager. That was the shocking confession we heard today from the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety. And that decision to wait was made by the Uvalde School District's chief of police, the on-scene commander. 21 people were killed, 19 children, 17 others were hurt. Fox 4's Sean Rabb listened in on a morning news conference that finally gave us a much more accurate but much more disturbing truth about what actually happened and what didn't. Sean.
Yeah, kind of disturbing things that were learned today. Listen, there were 19 police officers in the hallway, and they were waiting at the ready, but they could not move forward because of the command that they had been given. The command to wait for other equipment, wait for backup, wait for SWAT, a wait that cost precious time, and a wait that the DPS director emotionally said was the wrong call. The newest timeline of the tragedy at Robb Elementary begins at 11:37 a.m. A teacher propping the west side door open, likely unaware that she's about to allow evil into the school. A minute later, Salvador Ramos crashes his grandmother's truck into a culvert at the edge of school property. Two witnesses at the funeral home across the street rush to help.
They saw a man with a gun exit the passenger side with a backpack. They immediately began running. Ramos began shooting at him.
11:30, the first 911 call comes from the school, the same teacher who propped the door open, alerting about the crash and a man with a gun. 1 minute later, Ramos is in the school parking lot and shooting at the campus. Initial reports said a school resource officer confronted the 18-year-old at the back of the school. Thursday, we learned that was not correct. And now we know the assigned resource officer was not on campus, but was in his cruiser.
But had heard the 911 call with a man with a gun, drove immediately to the area, sped to what he thought was the man with a gun, to the back of the school, which turned out to be a teacher, and not the suspect. In doing so, he drove right by the suspect, who was hunkered down behind a vehicle, where he began shooting at the school.
11:33, Ramos is inside the building. DPS showing a diagram of his movements before shooting into connected classrooms 111 and 112. A surviving student telling one network the shooter entered the room as her teacher was about to lock the door.
That he shot more than 100 rounds based on the audio evidence at that time.
11:35. 3 Uvalde City Police come through the same propped open door Ramos entered. 3 other local officers and a sheriff's deputy follow them. The first 3 officers go to the closed classroom door as 2 are grazed by gunfire. Shooting continues for many minutes. 12:03. A 911 call from inside the adjoining classrooms.
She identified herself and whispered, she's in room 112.
At that time, 19 officers were in the hallway outside rooms 111 and 112, but officers did not go forward.
There were plenty of officers to do whatever needed to be done, with one exception, is that the incident commander inside believed they needed more equipment and more officers to do a tactical breach.
Still more 911 calls coming from inside those classrooms.
At 12:10, she called back. In room 12, advised there were multiple dead. 12:13, again she called on the phone. Again at 12:16, she called back and said there was 8 to 9 students alive.
12:21, a child calls for help. The operator tells her stay on the line and be quiet. 3 gunshots are heard in the audio. Still, officers don't go forward. McCraw tries to explain to the media and families listening.
Again, the on-scene commander considered a barricaded subject and that there was time and there were no more children at risk. Obviously, based upon the information we have, there were children in that classroom that were at risk, and it was, in fact, still an active shooter situation.
Minutes later, the little girl pleads with 911 for help.
Approximately 12:43 and 12:47, she asked 911 to please send the police now.
Were the officers outside the doors aware of the 911 calls from within? DPS Director McCraw unable to answer that directly, but also admitting,
hey, from the benefit of hindsight, where I'm sitting now, of course it was not the right decision. It was the wrong decision, period. There's no excuse for that. But again, I wasn't there, but I'm just telling you, from what we know, we believe there should have been an entry at that as soon as you can.
12:50, the Border Patrol SWAT team arrives. They get access to the area almost 80 minutes after the shooting started, using the janitor's keys to unlock the door. 12:51, Salvador Ramos is killed. An anguished and angry McCraw saying what happened in Uvalde goes against the state's active shooter training and certification.
That doctrine requires officers, we don't care what agency you're from, you don't have to have a leader on the scene. Every officer lines up, stacks up, goes and finds where those rounds are being fired at and keeps shooting until the subject is dead, period.
But of course, we know that did not happen. We did not see or hear the Uvalde School District Chief of Police today. This case going to be a case study for law enforcement for the years to come. And this poignant footnote, Steve, there were 19 law enforcement officers in the hallway, 19 children in those 2 classrooms who lost their lives.
A couple questions, a little background maybe, Sean. How does the incident commander, in this case, the school district chief, become the incident commander on a scene like that?
Yeah, so this whole incident command structure is in place. Mm-hmm. It's taught universally. The commander is the highest ranking officer in a jurisdiction. So the chief was on scene at a school in his district. He became the incident commander. He could pass that off to someone at a higher rank than he, a federal agent, perhaps a state agent, but he didn't do that at this time, and they may not have been on scene.
Even the Uvalde police chief, I assume. So do we know if school district chief Pete Arredondo knew what DPS director McCraw just a few seconds ago referred to as doctrine, that you do not wait, you go in and engage?
I don't know for certain. I would say highly likely. It's taught nationwide. It's been taught nationwide for years. In fact, it was created right here in Texas, at Texas State, down in San Marcos. It's called ALERT, and that is the law enforcement rapid response training. Every department has it. It's universal in that sense, so that if there are officers from different agencies working together, they all know what to do and how to do it. This was a decision based on whether he thought there was still an active shooter or not inside those 2 classrooms.
Right. And school district police officers are likely the first to get that training as well, since they're at a school. All right, Sean, thank you.
The nation's recurring nightmare has happened again. Texas state officials say a gunman killed 18 children and at least 2 adults, including 1 teacher, at an elementary school today. It appears the 18-year-old shooter, Salvador Ramos, was killed by police. Gunfire broke out early this afternoon in the city of Uvalde. It's about 85 miles west of San Antonio. Heavily armed police swarmed the school, with ambulances close behind. School staffers and others waited and watched. Having just returned from a trip to Asia, President Biden spoke tonight at the White House, trying to console families and calling for greater action.
As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage.
And earlier today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott spoke in Abilene.
When parents drop their kids off at school, they have every expectation to know that they're going to be able to pick their child up when that school day ends. And there are families who are in mourning right now, and the state of Texas is in mourning with them.
As we learn more about this horrific event, I'm joined now by Taylor Pettaway. She's a reporter at the San Antonio Express News, and she is following all of this very closely from San Antonio, which is about 85 miles east of Uvalde. Taylor, thank you so much for being here on this just horrendous day for your community, for Texas, and for this entire country. I wonder if you could just tell us, what is the latest that you have heard from law enforcement about this tragedy today?
So right now, the latest that we're hearing is, unfortunately, the death toll has continued to climb ever since, the initial reports that we've gotten so far. Like you said, we have 18 children dead, 2, possibly 3 adults who have also perished in this. And just a community, a state, and a country right now that's just in utter disbelief and heartbreak.
Yeah, I can't imagine what the parents and the families in that community are going through today. We are talking about a massacre at an elementary school. So these are ostensibly children who are 8, 9, perhaps 10 years old. Is that correct? Have officials said anything more about the children themselves?
That is correct. So Rob's Elementary School is 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders, so very young children. We know that some of the victims, are as young as 10 years old, and it's just absolutely incredible in the worst way to, have to witness something like this and just watch as these parents and students and teachers have to deal with something like this.
We understand that the shooter himself was not a stranger to this community. He was from the local area. Have we learned anything else about why, if there is any real reason why, he visited this horror on this particular school today?
Unfortunately, we don't. Police haven't released any sort of motive, if they even have one, unfortunately, in situations like this, especially with the shooter who is now deceased. There's a great possibility that this is a question that we never get answered. We hope that one day that we'll know why this heinous act was committed, but, that we might not ever know.
Can you tell us a little bit more for people who are not familiar with Uvalde? What kind of a community is this? Who are these families that are going through this unspeakable moment?
Yeah, so Uvalde is it's a small town in Texas, about 16,000 people. Rob's Elementary alone only has about 600 students, so it's a small, very close-knit area, a lot of families, just a lot of roots held there. And so, when something like this happens, it just absolutely cuts to the core of the community.
I've been seeing reports that we heard from your governor earlier. We certainly heard what President Biden had to say about the need for greater action to try to address this. Your lieutenant governor and your attorney general both spoke earlier this evening and said In their minds, the solution to this is hardening schools, limiting exits and entrances, and arming more teachers. Is that kind of a response going to be accepted in the moment of such a terrible tragedy? Are those kinds of responses from your reporting going to be tolerated by people?
You know, it's really hard to say. I mean, I think as we've seen on multiple occasions with mass school shootings and just mass shootings in general in our country, often that's, you know, the very quick response right after a shooting. And I mean, here we still are. You know, I think a lot of schools and things have already started to do those measures where they've limited entrances and exits, where they've, you know, made people coming in get visitors badges, where they are, you know, are metal detectors, things like that. Some counties in Texas are now arming their teachers. I mean, it gets to a point where how many more measures can you take? I mean, what else is there left for us to do to try to protect, you know, the citizens of our state and of our country?
That is certainly a question we're going to keep asking for a long time. Taylor Pettaway from the San Antonio Express News, thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thank you.
At the Texas rampage comes just 10 days after another shooting massacre at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, left 10 people dead.
Thank you for watching. This is a very sad video. Rest in peace to everyone that died. We'll see y'all in the next show. Deuces.